The sound of my brother's laughter echoed across the dining room, like nails on a chalkboard, drowning out the gentle murmur of Thanksgiving conversation that had been flowing moments before. I sat frozen at the far end of my parents' mahogany table, my fork suspended halfway to my mouth, watching as Derek held up his phone to show everyone the screenshot he'd apparently been dying to share all evening. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Look at this, he announced with the kind of cruel glee that I remembered from our childhood, when he'd take particular pleasure in embarrassing me in front of company. Mia's LinkedIn profile says she's between opportunities again. That's corporate speak for unemployed, in case anyone's wondering. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances while Derek's wife Stephanie looked down at her plate, clearly mortified by her husband's behavior. My Aunt Sarah cleared her throat awkwardly, and Uncle Jim suddenly became very interested in carving more turkey. Even my teenage cousin Emma, who was usually glued to her own phone, looked up with wide eyes at the unexpected cruelty of the moment. Heat flooded my cheeks as I set down my fork and met Derek's smug gaze across the table. At 32, my older brother had always taken perverse pleasure in what he perceived as my failures, but tonight felt different. There was a viciousness to his attack that went beyond his usual condescending remarks about my career choices or living situation. This felt personal, calculated, designed to humiliate me in front of our entire extended family during what should have been a celebration of gratitude and togetherness. Derek, my mother said sharply, her voice carrying the tone that had terrified both of us as children. That's completely inappropriate. What? He replied with exaggerated innocence, though his eyes sparkled with malicious satisfaction. I'm just concerned about my little sister. 3 jobs in 2 years, Mom. At some point, you have to wonder if the problem isn't the employers. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire, acrid and impossible to ignore. According to Derek's narrative, I wasn't a talented professional who had made strategic career moves in a competitive market. I was a failure, a disappointment, someone who couldn't hold down a job because of personal inadequacies that he was all too happy to highlight for our family's entertainment. Actually, I said quietly, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded despite the humiliation burning in my chest, I resigned from my last position 6 months ago to pursue a better opportunity. Derek's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Right, the mysterious consulting work you keep talking about. How's that working out for you? Still living in that studio apartment in the sketchy part of downtown? Still driving that ancient Honda that sounds like it's about to die every time you start? The truth was, Derek wasn't entirely wrong about the surface details of my life, and that's what made his attack so particularly devastating. I did live in a modest studio apartment in a gentrifying neighborhood that he considered beneath his standard. I did drive a 12-year-old Honda Civic that had seen better days, but ran perfectly fine despite its cosmetic imperfections. To someone like Derek, who measured success solely by material possessions and outward appearances, my lifestyle choices painted a picture of failure and poor decision-making. What Derek didn't know, what none of them knew, was that every choice I'd made over the past 6 months had been carefully calculated and strategically planned. The studio apartment wasn't a sign of financial struggle. It was a deliberate decision to minimize my expenses while I built something that would change my life forever. The old Honda wasn't evidence of being unable to afford better transportation. It was a practical choice that allowed me to invest my money in ways that would pay dividends Derek couldn't even imagine. But sitting there at that table, surrounded by the mixed aromas of turkey and stuffing and the disappointed faces of my family members, I couldn't explain any of that without revealing secrets I wasn't ready to share. So I sat in silence while Derek continued his verbal assault, each word designed to diminish me in the eyes of people whose opinions had always mattered to me. I'm just saying, Derek continued, warming to his theme now that he had a captive audience. Maybe it's time to consider something more stable. I could probably get you an entry-level position at my company. Nothing fancy, obviously, but at least it would be steady income, regular hours, health insurance, the chance to learn from people who actually know how to succeed in business. The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Derek worked as a regional sales manager for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company, a position that provided him with a comfortable six-figure salary and enough authority to feed his ego without requiring any particularly exceptional skills or talent. In his mind, this made him eminently qualified to offer career advice to his struggling younger sister, especially in front of an audience that would witness his generosity and superior wisdom. Stephanie, Derek's wife of 8 years, finally looked up from her plate with an expression of barely controlled embarrassment. "Derek, maybe we should talk about something else," she suggested quietly. "This is supposed to be a family dinner." "I'm just trying to help," Derek replied with wounded innocence. "Mia knows I care about her. That's what family does. We look out for each other, and sometimes that means having tough conversations about making better choices." My father, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout this exchange, finally cleared his throat. "Son, I think you've made your point. Why don't we focus on what we're grateful for this year instead of dwelling on challenges?" But Derek was clearly not finished with his performance. He leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he'd delivered important wisdom that would benefit everyone present. "I'm grateful that I'm in a position to help family members who are struggling," he said with false piety. "That's what success is really about, being able to lift up the people you love." The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me. Derek's version of lifting people up apparently involved public humiliation and condescending offers of entry-level employment. His idea of love looked suspiciously like an opportunity to demonstrate his own superiority while positioning himself as the magnanimous successful brother rescuing his wayward sister from her poor life choices. I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about needing fresh air, and stepped out onto my parents' back patio. The November evening was crisp and clear, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky above our suburban Atlanta neighborhood. I could hear the muffled sounds of conversation resuming inside, probably with my parents apologizing for Derek's behavior while he defended his actions as necessary tough love. Standing there in the cool air, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the messages that had been accumulating throughout the day. There were Thanksgiving wishes from friends and colleagues, updates from former coworkers who had moved on to new positions, and most important, several notifications from the business platform where I'd been building something that would soon change everything. Derek thought he knew about my life. 6 months ago, I had been exactly where Derek thought I was, unemployed, uncertain about my future, living paycheck to paycheck while I figured out my next career move. The difference was that instead of wallowing in self-pity or accepting the first mediocre opportunity that came along, I had used that time to pursue something I'd been dreaming about for years, but had never had the courage to attempt. My name is Mia Chen, and at 29 years old I had spent most of my adult life playing it safe. After graduating from Emory University with a degree in business administration, I'd taken a series of corporate positions that looked impressive on paper but left me feeling empty and unfulfilled. Marketing coordinator at a tech startup that folded after 18 months, account executive at a digital advertising agency where I was overworked and underappreciated, project manager at a consulting firm that specialized in helping other companies downsize their workforce. Each position had taught me valuable skills and provided decent compensation, but none of them had ignited the passion I'd felt during my college entrepreneurship courses. I'd always known that I wanted to build something of my own, to create value rather than just managing other people's creations, but the fear of failure and the pressure to maintain a steady income had kept me trapped in the cycle of traditional employment. The catalyst for change had come in the form of a severance package from my last corporate job. The consulting firm had lost a major client, resulting in layoffs that affected nearly 30% of the staff, including me. While my colleagues scrambled to update their resumes and schedule interviews with competitors, I saw an opportunity to finally pursue the business idea that had been percolating in the back of my mind for years. The concept was elegantly simple: a platform that connected small businesses with freelance professionals for short-term projects that required specialized expertise. Think of it as a hybrid between traditional consulting and the gig economy, designed specifically for the growing number of small businesses that needed high-level strategic support but couldn't afford to hire full-time senior staff. I'd identified this gap in the market during my years in corporate consulting, watching as we charged massive fees to help large corporations with problems that many smaller businesses faced but couldn't afford to address. There was clearly demand for accessible, affordable expertise among entrepreneurs and small business owners, but no efficient way to connect them with qualified professionals who could provide targeted solutions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Using my severance pay as seed capital, I'd spent the past 6 months building what I called Connect Point, a comprehensive platform that would revolutionize how small businesses access professional expertise. The development process had consumed every waking hour and most of my financial resources, but the early results were incredibly promising. What made Connect Point different from existing freelancing platforms was its focus on high-level strategic work rather than simple task completion. Instead of connecting businesses with graphic designers or data entry specialists, we specialized in matching them with experienced professionals who could help with complex challenges like market expansion, operational efficiency, financial planning, and organizational development. The platform used sophisticated algorithms to match client needs with professional expertise, while providing built-in project management tools and quality assurance measures that ensured successful outcomes. We carefully vetted every professional on the platform, requiring extensive experience verification and client testimonials before approval. For businesses, we offered consultation services to help them identify their most pressing needs and structure projects for maximum impact. During the beta testing phase, I'd worked with a handful of small businesses in the Atlanta area, providing everything from marketing strategy development to operational optimization. The results had been remarkable. Clients consistently reported significant improvements in efficiency, profitability, and strategic clarity after working with Connect Point professionals. Word had spread quickly through Atlanta's tight-knit small business community, and demand for the platform had grown faster than I'd anticipated. Within 4 months, I had a waiting list of over 200 businesses wanting to access our services, and more than 500 qualified professionals applying to join our network. The success had attracted attention from investors who specialized in early-stage technology companies. 3 weeks ago, I'd signed a Series A funding agreement that provided Connect Point with enough capital to expand nationally while maintaining my majority ownership and control over the company's direction. The investment had come with a valuation that made me, on paper at least, worth more than Derek would earn in his entire career. But perhaps most satisfying of all was the message I'd received just hours before arriving at my parents' house for Thanksgiving dinner. Stephanie, Derek's wife, worked as a human resources director for a growing marketing agency that specialized in helping small businesses develop their brand presence. Her company had been struggling with employee retention and operational efficiency issues that were limiting their ability to take on new clients and expand their services. Through her professional network, Stephanie had heard about a new consulting platform that was getting remarkable results for small businesses facing similar challenges. She'd submitted an application to work with Connect Point, not knowing that the founder and CEO of the company was her sister-in-law, the woman her husband had spent years dismissing as a career failure. The irony was so perfect it almost seemed scripted. Tomorrow morning, I would be conducting my first consultation call with Stephanie's company, during which she would discover that the successful entrepreneur she was hoping to work with was the same person Derek had just finished humiliating in front of our entire family. Standing on my parents' patio, looking at the message confirming our 9 a.m. appointment, I felt a mixture of anticipation and something that might have been vindication. For years, I'd endured Derek's condescending comments about my career choices, his subtle implications that my struggles reflected personal inadequacies rather than market conditions or strategic decisions. Tomorrow, the power dynamic between us would shift in ways he couldn't possibly anticipate. But more than personal satisfaction, I felt genuine excitement about the opportunity to help Stephanie's company address their challenge. The problems she'd described in her application were exactly the kind of issues that Connect Point had been designed to solve, and I was confident that our collaboration would produce significant improvements in their operations and profitability. The sliding door behind me opened, and my mother stepped out onto the patio carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one and settled into the wicker chair beside me, her expression reflecting the exhaustion that comes from managing family conflicts during what should have been a peaceful holiday gathering. "I'm sorry about Derek," she said quietly. "I don't know what's gotten into him lately. He's never been this openly hostile before." I sipped my coffee and considered her words. The truth was, Derek's hostility wasn't new. It had just become more blatant as his own insecurities grew. Despite his comfortable salary and stable position, he'd been passed over for promotion twice in the past year. Watching as younger colleagues advanced past him into roles he'd assumed would eventually be his. His marriage to Stephanie, while solid, lacked the passion and excitement that had characterized their early years together. At 34, he was beginning to realize that his life might peak at reasonably successful rather than achieving the exceptional success he'd always assumed was his birthright. In that context, my apparent struggles had provided him with a convenient target for his frustration. By positioning himself as the successful sibling offering wisdom to his floundering sister, he could maintain the illusion of superiority that his stagnating career no longer supported. My failures validated his choices and reinforced his belief that he was the responsible, practical one in the family. "I think Derek's going through a difficult period," I said diplomatically. "Sometimes people lash out when they're feeling insecure about their own situation." My mother nodded thoughtfully. "Stephanie mentioned that he's been stressed about work lately, something about reorganization at his company and concerns about job security, but that doesn't excuse the way he treated you tonight." The revelation about Derek's work situation added another layer to the evening's dynamics. If he was worried about his own job security, my apparent unemployment would represent both a source of anxiety. What if he ended up in the same situation and had opportunity to feel superior by comparison? His attacks on my career choices might have been as much about convincing himself of his own stability as they were about embarrassing me. "How are you really doing, sweetheart?" my mother asked, her voice gentle with concern. "I know you've been working on some kind of consulting project, but you've been so secretive about the details. Are you managing okay financially? Your father and I worry about you living alone in that neighborhood." The genuine care in her voice made me wish I could share the truth about what I'd been building over the past 6 months, but I'd made a strategic decision to keep Connect Point's development private until I was ready to launch publicly. Too many entrepreneurs made the mistake of announcing their ventures before they were ready to deliver, creating expectations that could become burdens if the development process took longer than anticipated. "I'm doing better than it might appear," I said carefully. "The consulting work has been more successful than I expected, and I've been able to build some interesting professional relationships. I can't share all the details yet, but I'm optimistic about where things are heading." My mother smiled, apparently reassured by the confidence in my voice even if she couldn't understand the specifics of my situation. "I'm proud of you for pursuing something you're passionate about instead of just taking the first job that came along. That takes courage even if Derek doesn't understand it." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes watching the lights come on in neighboring houses. As families settled in for their own Thanksgiving evening activities, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The years of corporate frustration, the fear and uncertainty of leaving stable employment, the countless 18-hour days spent developing Connect Point's technology and business model. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter, not just for my business, but for my relationship with my family. Once Stephanie discovered my identity during our consultation call, word would inevitably get back to Derek about his sister's actual professional situation. The dynamic that had defined our relationship for years, successful older brother offering guidance to struggling younger sister, would be permanently altered. But tonight, I was still just Mia, the family disappointment who couldn't hold down a job and lived in a questionable neighborhood. Tomorrow I would become someone entirely different in their eyes, and I wasn't sure how that transformation would affect our family relationships going forward. The sliding door opened again, and Stephanie appeared on the patio looking hesitant and slightly embarrassed. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said quietly. "I just wanted to apologize for Derek's behavior tonight. He was completely out of line." "You don't need to apologize for him," I replied, genuinely appreciating her gesture, "but thank you for saying something." Stephanie sat down in the chair across from us, wrapping her cardigan more tightly around herself against the evening chill. At 31, she was intelligent, accomplished and genuinely kind, qualities that sometimes made me wonder what she saw in Derek beyond his surface-level charm and financial stability. "I know Derek can be difficult," she continued, "but he really does care about you. I think he just has a hard time expressing it appropriately. He grew up believing that success meant following a very specific path, and when other people choose different routes, he interprets that as making poor decisions. Her analysis was probably accurate, but it didn't excuse the cruelty of Derek's public attacks on my career and lifestyle choices. Caring about someone's well-being didn't justify humiliating them in front of family members, especially when the concerns were based on incomplete information and unfair assumptions. I appreciate that you're trying to defend him, I said. But Derek's behavior tonight wasn't about concern for my welfare. It was about making himself feel superior by diminishing me in front of an audience. Stephanie winced, clearly recognizing the truth in my assessment. You're right, and I'm sorry. I hate when he gets like this. It's not the man I married, and it's not the person he is most of the time. My mother, who had been listening to this exchange with interest, leaned forward slightly. Stephanie, you work in human resources, don't you? Maybe you could give Mia some advice about navigating the current job market. The irony of the suggestion was almost overwhelming. Tomorrow morning, Stephanie would be seeking my advice about navigating her company's operational challenges, completely unaware that the expertise she needed was sitting right in front of her at this moment. Actually, Stephanie said, brightening at the opportunity to be helpful, I've been hearing about some really innovative companies that are changing how businesses access professional expertise. There's this new platform that connects small businesses with experienced consultants for short-term projects. It's supposed to be revolutionizing the consulting industry by making high-level expertise accessible to companies that couldn't afford traditional consulting firms. My heart rate accelerated as I realized she was talking about ConnectPoint without knowing I was the founder. The description she was giving was remarkably accurate, suggesting that word about our platform was spreading even faster than I'd realized through professional network. That sounds interesting, I managed to say, hoping my voice remained steady. Have you had any experience with this platform? Not yet, but my company is actually scheduled to start working with them tomorrow. We've been struggling with some operational efficiency issues that are limiting our growth, and traditional consulting firms want to charge us more than our entire quarterly budget for a solution. This new platform promises to connect us with experienced professionals who can provide targeted solutions at a fraction of the cost. The excitement in Stephanie's voice was unmistakable, and I felt a surge of pride knowing that ConnectPoint was already building the kind of reputation I'd hoped for when I started developing the concept. The fact that successful professionals like Stephanie were talking about our platform in such positive terms validated the countless hours I'd invested in creating something genuinely valuable for the market. What kind of operational issues is your company facing? I asked, curious to learn more about the challenges I'd be helping her address during our consultation call. Stephanie launched into a detailed explanation of her company's struggles with employee retention, project management inefficiencies, and the difficulty of scaling their services to accommodate new clients without compromising quality. As she spoke, I found myself mentally cataloging potential solutions and identifying the types of professionals from our network who would be best equipped to address each specific challenge. The problems she described were complex but not uncommon among growing service-based businesses. With the right strategic approach and implementation support, her company could probably improve their operational efficiency by 30 to 40% within 6 months, while simultaneously reducing the stress and burnout that were contributing to their retention issue. It sounds like you have a clear understanding of what needs to be addressed, I said when she finished her explanation. That's actually half the battle with these kinds of operational challenges. Many companies struggle because they can't identify the root causes of their problem. That's exactly what the consultant from this platform said during our preliminary discussion, Stephanie replied with enthusiasm. She was incredibly insightful about the interconnected nature of our various issues. I'm really looking forward to our formal consultation tomorrow morning. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Stephanie describing her hopes for the collaboration and her optimism about finding solutions that would position her company for sustainable growth. Throughout the discussion, I found myself impressed by her analytical thinking and genuine commitment to creating a positive work environment for her employees. She was exactly the kind of client that ConnectPoint had been designed to serve: intelligent, motivated, and focused on long-term success rather than quick fixes. As the evening wound down and family members began making preparations to leave, I found myself reflecting on the strange symmetry of the situation. In less than 12 hours, I would transition from being the object of Derek's condescending pity to being the solution provider that Stephanie desperately needed for her business challenges. The transformation wouldn't just be professional, it would be deeply personal as well. For years, I'd allowed Derek's perception of my career to influence how I saw myself, even when I knew his assessments were unfair and based on incomplete information. Tomorrow would mark the end of that dynamic forever, replacing it with a new reality, where my professional accomplishments would speak for themselves. But beyond the personal satisfaction of proving Derek wrong, I was genuinely excited about the opportunity to help Stephanie's company achieve their goal. The problems she'd described were exactly the kind of challenges that inspired me to create Connect Point in the first place. Situations where talented professionals were struggling not because they lacked skills or dedication, but because they didn't have access to the strategic expertise that could transform their operation. As I drove home to my studio apartment that night, passing through the sketchy neighborhood that Derek loved to criticize, I felt a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with vindication and everything to do with purpose. Tomorrow would be the first day of a new chapter in my life, one where I would no longer be defined by other people's limited understanding of success and failure. The old Honda started reliably, as it always, carrying me through the streets of downtown Atlanta, toward the home I'd chosen not because I couldn't afford better, but because it allowed me to invest in building something that would change, not just my own life, but the lives of countless small business owners who needed access to expertise they couldn't otherwise obtain. In less than 10 hours, Stephanie would discover that the successful entrepreneur she was planning to work with was the same person her husband had just finished mocking at the Thanksgiving dinner table. The revelation would change everything Derek thought he knew about success, failure, and the true measure of professional accomplishment. But tonight, I was still just Mia driving through the city in my ancient Honda, living in my modest studio apartment, preparing for the moment when I would finally step out of the shadows and claim the success I'd worked so hard to build. The real story was just beginning. The alarm on my phone buzzed at 6:30 Friday morning, cutting through the peaceful silence of my studio apartment with its insistent digital chirping. I'd barely slept, my mind racing with anticipation about the consultation call scheduled for 9 a.m. with Stephanie's company, Meridian Marketing Solutions. Every time I'd started to drift off, another wave of nervous energy would surge through me as I contemplated the moment when she would realize that her sister-in-law was the CEO she'd been so eager to work with. I padded across the polished concrete floors to my small but efficient kitchen, grateful for the floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with early morning light. The studio apartment that Derek loved to mock had been chosen specifically for moments like this. The eastern exposure provided natural illumination for video calls, while the minimalist aesthetic projected exactly the kind of professional competence that clients expected from a successful consultant. The truth was, I could have afforded a much larger place months ago, but maintaining the modest lifestyle served multiple strategic purposes. It kept my overhead low during Connect Point's development phase, allowed me to reinvest profits back into the business for faster growth, and perhaps most importantly, it had prevented family members like Derek from asking uncomfortable questions about my income sources. As far as he knew, I was barely scraping by on sporadic consulting gigs while living in what he considered a questionable neighborhood. While my coffee brewed, I reviewed the preliminary assessment I'd prepared for Meridian Marketing Solutions, based on the information Stephanie had provided during their application process. The company had grown from a small boutique agency to a mid-sized firm with 38 employees over the past 5 years, but their rapid expansion had created operational bottlenecks that were limiting their ability to serve clients effectively and retain talented staff members. The core issues were interconnected in ways that Stephanie probably didn't fully understand yet. Their project management systems hadn't scaled with their growth, creating confusion about deadlines, deliverables, and resource allocation. This led to overworked account managers, missed deadlines, and client dissatisfaction that was beginning to impact their reputation in Atlanta's competitive marketing landscape. The stress was causing talented employees to leave for competitors, which increased the workload on remaining staff members and perpetuated a destructive cycle. What made the situation particularly challenging was that Stephanie and her business partner, David Chen, no relation, despite sharing my surname, were both creative professionals who had built their reputation on innovative marketing campaigns, rather than operational excellence. They understood how to create compelling brand strategies and execute successful campaigns, but they lacked the systems thinking necessary to optimize their internal processes for sustainable growth. Traditional consulting firms had quoted them fees ranging from $75,000 to $150,000 for comprehensive operational overhauls that would take 6 to 9 months to implement. For a company with annual revenues of approximately $2.8 million, those costs represented a significant percentage of their profit margins and would require them to delay other important investments in technology and talent acquisition. ConnectPoint's approach was entirely different. Instead of providing a massive, expensive solution that attempted to address every issue simultaneously, we specialized in identifying the highest impact interventions that could create meaningful improvements with minimal investment of time and resources. Our network included operational efficiency experts who could design elegant solutions for growing service businesses, change management specialists who could help teams adapt to new processes, and technology consultants who could recommend and implement tools that would automate routine tasks. The beauty of the platform was its flexibility and scalability. We could start with targeted solutions for Meridian's most pressing challenges, measure the results, and then expand the engagement to address additional issues as the company grew and evolved. This approach allowed clients to see immediate returns on their investment, while building confidence in our ability to deliver sustainable improvements. As I prepared for the call, I felt the familiar surge of excitement that came with solving complex business problems. This was why I'd left the security of corporate employment to build ConnectPoint, the opportunity to create genuine value for entrepreneurs and small business owners who were passionate about their work, but needed strategic support to achieve their full potential. At 8:45, I settled into the ergonomic chair at my desk, adjusting the ring light that would ensure optimal video quality for the consultation. My home office occupied one corner of the studio, but careful arrangement of furniture and lighting made it appear larger and more professional than the actual square footage might suggest. The backdrop included tasteful artwork and a bookshelf filled with business strategy texts, projecting the kind of intellectual authority that clients expected from senior consultants. I opened the ConnectPoint platform and navigated to the video conference portal, double-checking that all my technology was functioning properly. The consultation would be recorded for quality assurance purposes, and to provide Stephanie with a reference document she could share with her business partner and other key stakeholders. Professional presentation was crucial during these initial interactions, as clients often made decisions about whether to move forward based as much on their confidence in the consultant as on the specific recommendations being offered. At exactly 9 a.m., Stephanie's name appeared in the waiting room, and I clicked to admit her to the conference. The screen flickered for a moment before revealing her familiar face, though she was clearly dressed for a professional meeting rather than the casual family gathering we'd shared less than 12 hours earlier. She wore a navy blazer over a crisp white blouse, her hair styled in the polished look she typically favored for important business meetings. "Good morning," I said with a warm but professional smile. "I'm Mia Chen, founder and CEO of ConnectPoint. Thank you for choosing our platform to address Meridian's operational challenges." For a moment, Stephanie's face went completely blank as her brain processed what she was seeing and hearing. I could literally watch the recognition dawn in her eyes as she realized that the successful entrepreneur she'd been so excited to work with was the same person Derek had spent Thanksgiving dinner mocking for her career failures and questionable life choices. "Mia," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, You're the CEO of ConnectPoint." "I am," I replied calmly, maintaining my professional demeanor while internally savoring the shock on her face. "I imagine this is somewhat surprising given the context of our last conversation, but I want to assure you that my personal relationship with your family won't affect my commitment to helping Meridian achieve its operational goals." Stephanie stared at the screen for several more seconds, clearly struggling to reconcile the image of Derek's supposedly unsuccessful sister with the confident business leader addressing her through the video call. I could see her mind racing as she processed the implications of this revelation, not just for their business relationship, but for everything Derek had said about my career prospects and life choices. "I don't understand," she said finally. Last night you were asking me about the platform like you'd never heard of it before. You let me go on and on about how excited I was to work with this innovative consulting company, and you never mentioned that you were the founder. I was gathering information about your specific needs and challenges, I explained. Some of the most valuable insights come from understanding how clients perceive our services and what expectations they bring to the collaboration. Your enthusiasm and detailed description of Meridian's situation helped me prepare more effectively for today's consultation. The explanation was true, though it didn't capture the full complexity of why I'd chosen not to reveal my identity during our family conversation. The truth was, I'd wanted to experience one last evening as Derek's failed sister before our family dynamic shifted permanently. Once Stephanie shared this discovery with Derek, I would never again be the object of his condescending career advice or the target of his public humiliation attempt. Stephanie leaned back in her chair, running her hands through her carefully styled hair in a gesture that suggested she was still processing the magnitude of what she'd learned. Does Derek know about this? About Connect Point and your success? No, I replied simply. I've kept the development of my business private while focusing on building a solid foundation before launching publicly. You're actually among the first clients to work with us through our formal platform, but the platform has been operating for months, hasn't it? I mean, the preliminary research I did suggested that Connect Point already has an established reputation in the small business community. Her observation was astute and demonstrated the kind of analytical thinking that had made me optimistic about working with Meridian. Connect Point had indeed been operating informally for several months, but I'd been careful to keep my personal involvement private while building credibility through client results rather than personal marketing. We've been working with a select group of beta clients to refine our processes and demonstrate our effectiveness, I explained. The formal platform launch is scheduled for next month, but we've been accepting clients who were referred through our network or who found us through professional connection. Stephanie nodded slowly, apparently beginning to understand the timeline and strategy behind Connect Point's development. I could see her shifting mental gears from processing personal shock to focusing on the business opportunity in front of her, which was exactly the kind of professional maturity I'd hoped to see from our collaboration. So when you said you were doing consulting work, she said, you were actually building a company that's revolutionizing how small businesses access professional expertise. Exactly. The consulting work Derek has been dismissing as unsuccessful freelancing has actually been market research and product development for a platform that's already generating significant revenue and attracting interest from investors. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. While Derek had been mocking my consulting work as evidence of career instability, I'd been systematically building a business that would soon make me more successful than he could imagine. His condescending offers of entry-level employment at his pharmaceutical company seemed particularly absurd in light of what Stephanie was discovering about my actual professional situation. I have to ask, Stephanie said, leaning forward with obvious curiosity, how successful has Connect Point become? I mean, Derek has been telling everyone that you're struggling financially and barely making ends meet. The question put me in a delicate position. While I was proud of Connect Point's rapid growth and financial success, discussing specific revenue figures or valuation details would be inappropriate during a client consultation. I also wasn't sure how much information Stephanie might share with Derek, and I wanted to control the timing and context of any revelations about my business achievements. Connect Point has exceeded our initial projections for growth and profitability, I said carefully. We've been able to attract both exceptional talent to our professional network and clients who are achieving meaningful results from our services. The business model is proving to be sustainable and scalable in ways that position us well for continued expansion. Stephanie's eyes widened at the implications of what I was saying, even without specific financial detail. As someone who worked in human resources for a growing company, she understood that sustainable profitability and scalable growth were indicators of serious business success rather than the freelance struggles Derek had been describing. And the studio apartment, the old Honda. Derek made it sound like you were barely getting by. Those are lifestyle choices that support my business strategy, I replied with a slight smile. Low overhead allows me to reinvest profits into growth, rather than spending them on expensive possessions that don't contribute to long-term success. The apartment provides everything I need for both living and working, while the Honda is reliable transportation that doesn't require significant maintenance investment. The explanation clearly resonated with Stephanie, who had built her own career by making strategic decisions about resource allocation and long-term planning. She was beginning to understand that what Derek had interpreted as signs of failure were actually evidence of disciplined business thinking and strategic financial management. "Derek is going to lose his mind when he finds out about this," she said with a mixture of amazement and what might have been anticipation. "He's spent so much time positioning himself as the successful sibling who needs to help his struggling sister. This completely turns that dynamic upside down." "Which brings me to an important point," I said, transitioning back to professional territory. "While I understand that this revelation will inevitably affect family relationships, I want to ensure that our business collaboration remains focused on achieving Meridian's operational goals. Personal dynamics shouldn't interfere with the professional service you're paying for." Stephanie nodded emphatically. "Absolutely. Whatever happens between you and Derek, Meridian needs the help you're offering. Our operational challenges haven't changed just because I discovered that you're not the person he's been describing." "Excellent. In that case, let's review the preliminary assessment I've prepared based on the information you provided during your application process." For the next hour, we dove deep into Meridian's operational challenges, exploring the interconnected nature of their project management issues, staffing concerns, and growth limitations. Stephanie proved to be an engaged and insightful collaborator, asking thoughtful questions about potential solutions and providing additional context that helped me understand the nuances of their specific situation. The conversation reinforced my initial impression that Meridian was exactly the kind of client Connect Point had been designed to serve. They had talented leadership, a solid client base, and strong growth potential, but they needed strategic support to optimize their internal operations for sustainable expansion. The problems they were facing weren't unique or unsolvable. They just required expertise that small companies typically couldn't afford to access through traditional consulting channels. Based on our discussion, I recommended a phased approach that would address their most critical challenges first, while building toward comprehensive operational optimization. Phase 1 would focus on implementing a new project management system and training staff on standardized processes that would reduce confusion and improve efficiency. Phase 2 would address their employee retention issues through improved workflow design and workload distribution. Phase 3 would involve developing scalable systems that could accommodate continued growth without creating new bottlenecks. The timeline for Phase 1 implementation would be approximately 6 weeks, I explained, with measurable improvements in project efficiency expected within the first month. The total investment for all 3 phases would be less than 40% of what traditional consulting firms quoted you, and each phase can be evaluated independently before proceeding to the next level. Stephanie's excitement was evident as she took notes on the proposed approach. "This is exactly what we need. The phased approach makes so much sense, both financially and operationally. We can see results from each investment before committing to additional services. That's the core philosophy behind Connect Point," I replied. "We believe that small businesses should have access to the same level of strategic expertise as large corporations, but delivered in ways that are appropriate to their scale and budget constraints." As the consultation concluded, Stephanie was clearly enthusiastic about moving forward with our recommendation. We scheduled a follow-up call for the following week to finalize the details of Phase 1 implementation and introduce her to the specific professionals from our network who would be working on Meridian's project. "I have one more question," Stephanie said as we prepared to end the call. "How long do you think it will be before Connect Point becomes widely known in the business community? I mean, once word gets out about what you've built, Derek's going to look pretty foolish for all his comments about your career." The question touched on something I'd been thinking about extensively, as Connect Point grew beyond my initial projection. Success in the business world was often accompanied by public recognition, which meant that my family would inevitably learn about my achievements regardless of whether I chose to share that information directly. "Our formal public launch is scheduled for next month," I said. At that point, Connect Point will begin actively marketing our services and seeking media coverage to build brand awareness. It's likely that our success will become more visible in the local business community fairly quickly after that. Stephanie grinned with obvious anticipation. I can't wait to see Derek's reaction when he realizes that his unemployed sister has built a company that's more successful than anything he's ever accomplished. The irony is just too perfect. After ending the call, I sat back in my chair and allowed myself a moment to savor what had just transpired. The consultation had gone even better than I'd hoped, confirming that Meridian would be an excellent client, while simultaneously revealing my business success to someone who would inevitably share that information with Derek. But beyond the personal satisfaction of proving my brother wrong, I felt genuine excitement about the opportunity to help Stephanie's company achieve its full potential. The problems they were facing were complex but solvable, and I was confident that our collaboration would produce the kind of transformative results that had made Connect Point's reputation among beta clients. The rest of Friday passed in a blur of business activity. I had 2 more client consultations scheduled, both with companies that had been referred through our growing network of satisfied customers. I also needed to review applications from professionals who wanted to join Connect Point's expert network, ensuring that we maintained the high standards that differentiated our platform from generic freelancing sites. By evening, I'd completed a full day of activities that generated more revenue than Derek earned in a typical month at his pharmaceutical company. The irony wasn't lost on me as I reflected on his Thanksgiving dinner comments about my need for stable employment and regular income. If only he knew that my unstable consulting business was actually more profitable and secure than his traditional corporate position. But Derek's discovery of my success was still in the future. Tonight, I was simply Mia, working late in her studio apartment, building something that would change not just her own life, but the lives of countless small business owners who needed access to expertise they couldn't otherwise afford. The real transformation was yet to come. Saturday morning brought an unexpected text message from Stephanie that made my heart race with anticipation. "Can we talk privately before I share anything with Derek? I want to understand the full scope of what you've accomplished before this becomes a family conversation." I called her immediately, curious about what additional information she wanted, and how she was processing the revelation about my business success. When she answered, her voice carried a mixture of excitement and something that sounded like protective concern. "I've been thinking about yesterday's consultation all night," she began, "and I realize that there's probably much more to your story than what we discussed during our business meeting. Derek has been so dismissive of your career choices for so long, and I'm starting to understand that he's been completely wrong about your situation. What specifically would you like to know?" I asked, settling into my favorite reading chair with a cup of coffee and the morning sunlight streaming through my windows. "Everything," she said with a laugh. "How long you've been planning this, how you developed the expertise to build something like Connect Point, what your actual financial situation is compared to what Derek believed. I want to understand the full extent of how wrong he's been before I decide how to handle sharing this information with him." Her request was reasonable, though it would require me to reveal details about my business that I'd been keeping private even from family members. But Stephanie had proven herself to be trustworthy and professional, and she deserved to understand the complete picture before our business relationship proceeded any further. "The concept for Connect Point has been developing for several years," I began, "but the serious planning phase started about 18 months ago, when I realized that my corporate career wasn't providing the kind of professional fulfillment I was seeking. I spent 6 months researching the market, developing the business model, and identifying the technological requirements for the platform." "But you were still employed during that research phase?" "Yes, I was working at the consulting firm that eventually laid me off." The irony is that Derek views that layoff as evidence of my career instability, when it was actually the catalyst that gave me the freedom and financial resources to pursue something I'd been planning for months. Stephanie was quiet for a moment, processing the timeline and its implications. "So when Derek talks about your 3 jobs in 2 years, he's actually describing a period when you were strategically positioning yourself to launch your own business." Each position taught me different aspects of what I needed to know about consulting, operations management, and client relationships. I wasn't randomly changing jobs because I couldn't succeed.
I was building expertise and professional connections that would support Connect Point's development. And financially, Derek seems convinced that you're barely surviving on sporadic consulting income. This was the question I'd been expecting, though answering it would require revealing information that would fundamentally change how my family viewed my life choices. But Stephanie deserved honesty, especially given that she was now both a client and someone who would inevitably be involved in family discussions about my career. Connect Point has been profitable since our third month of operation, I said carefully.
The business model generates recurring revenue from successful client relationships, and our growth has exceeded my most optimistic initial projections. Without going into specific figures, I can tell you that my annual income is now significantly higher than Derek's salary at the pharmaceutical company. The silence that followed my statement stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had been disconnected. When Stephanie finally spoke, her voice carried a note of amazement that suggested she was still processing the magnitude of what I'd revealed. Significantly higher, she repeated slowly. Mia, do you realize what this means? Derek has spent years positioning himself as the successful sibling who needs to help his struggling sister, and it turns out that you're actually more successful than he is. Success means different things to different people, I replied diplomatically, though privately I shared her assessment of the situation's irony. No, this goes beyond different definitions of success, Stephanie insisted. Derek has been objectively wrong about your financial situation, your career prospects, and your professional capabilities. He's been giving career advice to someone who's actually more accomplished in business than he is. Her analysis was accurate, though I suspected that Derek's reaction to learning about Connect Point would be more complex than simple embarrassment about being wrong. His identity as the responsible, successful older brother had been central to his self-image for years, and discovering that his assumptions about my life were completely incorrect would force him to reconsider not just his relationship with me, but his own achievements and status within our family. How do you think he'll react when he finds out? I asked, genuinely curious about Stephanie's perspective on her husband's likely response. Honestly, I think he'll go through several stages. First shock, then disbelief, then probably some anger about being kept in the dark, and eventually, well, hopefully pride in what you've accomplished. But it might take him some time to work through his feelings about having been so wrong for so long. Her prediction seemed reasonable, though I suspected that Derek's journey from shock to pride might be longer and more complicated than either of us anticipated. Men who built their identity around being the successful provider and wise advisor often struggled with revelations that challenged those foundational beliefs about themselves. There's something else I want to discuss, Stephanie continued. The consultation yesterday was incredibly valuable, and I'm excited about implementing your recommendations at Meridian. But I also realize that working with you puts me in a somewhat awkward position with Derek. How do you want to handle the intersection of our business relationship and family dynamics? It was a thoughtful question that demonstrated Stephanie's professionalism and her understanding of the potential complications that could arise from mixing business and family relationships. I'd been thinking about the same issue since yesterday's consultation, knowing that our collaboration would inevitably affect how Derek and I interacted going forward. I think we should keep our business relationship completely separate from family interactions. Meridian's operational challenges and Connect Point solutions exist independently of whatever personal dynamics develop between Derek and me. You're paying for professional expertise, and you deserve to receive that without any interference from family complications. That makes sense, Stephanie agreed. And it might actually make it easier for Derek to process everything if he knows that our business relationship is based on merit rather than family connection. We talked for another 30 minutes about the implementation timeline for Meridian's project and the specific professionals from Connect Point's network who would be involved in their operational overhaul. By the end of the conversation, I was even more optimistic about our collaboration and the results we would achieve together. One last question, Stephanie said as we prepared to end the call. When are you planning to tell Derek about Connect Point yourself, or are you waiting for him to find out through other sources? The question touched on something I'd been avoiding thinking about directly. While I'd known that Derek would eventually learn about my business success, I hadn't developed a clear plan for how or when that revelation would occur. Part of me wanted to maintain the element of surprise, allowing him to discover my achievements through indirect sources that would maximize the impact of his realization about how wrong he'd been. But another part of me recognized that family relationships required more consideration than business strategy. Derek might be condescending and occasionally cruel in his assessments of my career choices, but he was still my brother, and our relationship would continue long after the immediate satisfaction of proving him wrong had faded. I'm not sure yet, I admit. I'd been planning to keep ConnectPoint private until our public launch next month, but working with your company changes that timeline somewhat. I'll probably need to have a conversation with him sooner rather than later. Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished and excited about working with you professionally. Derek's opinions about your career don't change the fact that you've built something remarkable. After ending the call, I spent the rest of Saturday morning thinking about the conversation and its implications. Stephanie's support meant more to me than I'd expected, partly because she was someone whose professional judgment I respected, and partly because she represented a bridge between my business success and my family relationship. The weekend passed quietly, with no additional contact from family members beyond a routine text from my mother asking if I'd recovered from Derek's behavior at Thanksgiving dinner. I assured her that I was fine and that family conflicts didn't affect my optimism about my career prospects, which was certainly true, though perhaps not in the way she interpreted my response. Monday morning brought the beginning of ConnectPoint's most ambitious week yet. In addition to continuing our work with existing clients like Meridian, I had 3 new consultation calls scheduled with companies that had been referred through our growing network. The platform was gaining momentum faster than I'd anticipated, creating opportunities that would have been unimaginable just 6 months earlier. But perhaps most significantly, Monday also marked the beginning of the countdown to ConnectPoint's public launch, scheduled for the first week of December. The marketing materials were finalized, the press releases were drafted, and the professional network was prepared for the increased client volume that would come with broader market awareness. Derek would learn about my business success very soon, whether through his own discovery or through a conversation I initiated. The only question was whether I would control the timing and context of that revelation, or whether events would overtake my careful planning and force the issue in ways I hadn't anticipated. As I reviewed my calendar for the week ahead, I couldn't help but smile at the irony of my situation. In less than a month I would transition from being Derek's unemployed sister to being a publicly recognized entrepreneur whose company was revolutionizing how small businesses accessed professional expertise. The transformation was almost complete, and the real story was just beginning to unfold in ways that would surprise everyone involved. Tuesday afternoon brought the phone call I'd been both anticipating and dreading since Thanksgiving dinner. Derek's name appeared on my caller ID at 3:15, interrupting a productive planning session for ConnectPoint's upcoming public launch. His timing was impeccable in the worst possible way. I was deep in strategic thinking about market positioning and media outreach, when my brother's digital intrusion demanded immediate attention. "We need to talk," Derek said without preamble when I answered, his voice carrying the tight control of someone barely containing explosive emotions. "Stephanie told me some very interesting things about your supposed consulting business." The accusatory tone in his voice suggested that he viewed my business success as a personal betrayal rather than a professional achievement. In Derek's worldview, my failure to share information about ConnectPoint constituted deception designed to make him look foolish, rather than simple privacy about business developments that weren't his concern. "I imagine she did," I replied calmly, closing my laptop and settling back in my desk chair. "ConnectPoint has been quite successful, and Meridian is benefiting significantly from our operational consulting services." "Don't give me that corporate speak," Derek snapped. "Stephanie says you're making more money than I am. She says you've been running some kind of major business operation while letting everyone think you were unemployed and struggling. What kind of game have you been playing?" The outrage in his voice was palpable, but underneath the anger I could hear something else: uncertainty, confusion, and perhaps the first stirrings of recognition that his understanding of our family dynamics had been fundamentally flawed for months. Derek had built his identity around being the successful older brother who provided guidance and support to his less accomplished sister, Learning that his basic assumptions about my life were completely wrong was forcing him to question everything he thought he knew about our relationship. "I haven't been playing any games," I said firmly. "I've been building a business that serves an important market need while maintaining my privacy about the details until I was ready to launch publicly. Your assumptions about my financial situation and career prospects were never my responsibility to correct." "My assumptions?" Derek's voice rose with indignation. "You were living in that tiny apartment, driving that ancient car, talking about consulting work like it was barely keeping you afloat. What was I supposed to think? You were supposed to trust that I was capable of making intelligent decisions about my career and lifestyle without requiring your approval or understanding," I replied. "My choice to live modestly while reinvesting profits into business growth was a strategic decision, not evidence of failure." The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to wonder if Derek was still processing the implications of what I'd said. When he finally spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, less anger, more bewilderment, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't fit his preconceived notions about how the world worked. "Stephanie says your business is already established and profitable. She says you have investors and employees and some kind of technology platform that's revolutionizing consulting services. Is that true?" "It's true," I confirmed. ConnectPoint has exceeded our initial growth projections and attracted Series A funding that will support national expansion. We've built a comprehensive platform that connects small businesses with experienced professionals for strategic consulting projects. "And you've been doing this for how long?" "The development phase took about 18 months, including 6 months of market research while I was still employed at the consulting firm. We've been operating with clients for 8 months and we're launching publicly next month." Derek was quiet again, and I could practically hear his mental gears working as he tried to reconcile this information with his long-held beliefs about my career trajectory and professional capability. The Derek who had mocked my broke life at Thanksgiving dinner was struggling to understand how his unemployed sister had somehow become a successful entrepreneur without his knowledge or assistance. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally, and for the first time in our conversation his voice carried hurt rather than anger. "We're family, Mia. If you were building something this significant, why keep it secret from everyone?" The question touched on something I'd been expecting but hadn't fully prepared to address. Derek's pain at being excluded from my business journey was genuine, even if his previous behavior had made sharing that information impossible. But explaining why I'd kept ConnectPoint private would require acknowledging how his condescending attitude about my career choices had affected our relationship over the years. "I kept it private because I needed space to develop the business without external opinions or interference," I said carefully. "Building a company requires intense focus and confidence, and I couldn't afford to have that undermined by people who didn't understand my vision or strategy." "People like me, you mean?" Derek said, his voice flat with realization. "People who were convinced that my career struggles reflected personal inadequacies rather than market conditions or strategic transitions," I clarified. "I needed to prove to myself that ConnectPoint could succeed before I was ready to discuss it with family members who had strong opinions about what constituted appropriate career choices." Derek absorbed this explanation in silence, and I suspected he was beginning to understand how his behavior over the past few years had contributed to my decision to keep my business development private. The older brother who had positioned himself as the successful family member offering guidance to his struggling sister was confronting the possibility that his guidance hadn't been welcome or helpful. "So when you were talking about consulting work and living in that apartment," he said slowly, "you were actually building a multi-million-dollar business." "I was building a business that serves an important market need and generates sustainable revenue," I correct. "The financial success followed from creating genuine value for clients, not the other way around." "But Stephanie said," Derek started, then stopped himself. "She said your income is higher than mine, significantly higher." "ConnectPoint has been profitable since our 3rd month of operation," I confirmed. "The business model creates recurring revenue from successful client relationships, and our growth has exceeded my most optimistic projection." The admission hung between us like a bridge spanning years of misconceptions and missed communication. Derek had spent Thanksgiving dinner offering me entry-level employment at his pharmaceutical company, apparently believing that stable corporate benefits would rescue me from my precarious freelancing existence. Now he was learning that his struggling sister had actually built a business more successful than anything he'd achieved in his own career. I don't know what to say, Derek admitted finally. I feel like I've been wrong about everything. Your apartment, your car, your career prospects, your financial situation. I thought I was the successful one who needed to help you get back on track. You were measuring success using metrics that don't reflect my priorities or goals, I said gently. Expensive possessions and impressive job titles aren't the only indicators of professional achievement or personal fulfillment. But I made such an ass of myself at Thanksgiving, Derek continued, his voice heavy with embarrassment. I was so condescending about your consulting work and your lifestyle choices. I offered you an entry-level job like you were some kind of charity case who needed my help to get her life together. The remorse in his voice was genuine, and I felt my anger about his Thanksgiving behavior beginning to soften into something more complex. Derek's attacks on my career had been cruel and unnecessary, but they'd also been based on incomplete information and his own insecurities about professional success. Learning that his fundamental assumptions were wrong was clearly causing him to reevaluate not just his perception of my life, but his own understanding of what constituted meaningful achievement. You were operating with limited information and making assumptions based on what you could observe, I said. The mistake was believing that surface appearances told the complete story about my professional situation. You mean I was being an arrogant jerk who thought he knew everything about your life without bothering to ask the right question? I mean you were measuring my choices against standards that didn't account for different approaches to building a career and creating financial security, I replied diplomatically. Derek was quiet for several minutes, and I could sense that he was processing not just the revelation about ConnectPoint's success, but the implications for how he'd been treating me throughout our adult relationship. The pattern of condescending advice and public humiliation hadn't started at Thanksgiving dinner. It had been developing for years as Derek's own career stagnated while he convinced himself that his struggles were temporary and his sister's were permanent. Can I ask you something honestly? Derek said finally. And will you give me a straight answer instead of the diplomatic corporate response? Of course. How much of this secrecy was about not trusting me to be supportive of your business venture? I mean, did you think I would try to talk you out of it, or undermine your confidence somehow? The question cut straight to the heart of why I'd kept ConnectPoint private from family members, and answering it honestly would require acknowledging how Derek's behavior over the years had affected my willingness to share important developments in my life. But he deserved the truth, especially if we were going to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than misguided assumptions. I thought you would view my decision to leave stable employment as another example of poor judgment, I said carefully. Based on your previous reactions to my career transitions, I believed you would focus on the risks rather than the opportunities, and I couldn't afford to have my confidence undermined during the crucial development phase. Previous reactions, Derek said thoughtfully. You mean like when I criticized you for leaving the tech startup, or when I suggested that your job changes indicated problems with your work ethic? Among other examples, yeah. Your advice consistently emphasized security and traditional career paths over entrepreneurship and calculated risk-taking. I needed to prove to myself that ConnectPoint could succeed before I was ready to defend those choices to family members who might not understand the strategy. Derek absorbed this feedback in silence, and I suspected he was reviewing years of conversations through a new lens, recognizing how his well-intentioned advice had actually conveyed doubt about my professional judgment and capability. The older brother who thought he was providing helpful guidance was confronting the possibility that his input had been more harmful than helpful. God, I really have been an arrogant ass, he said finally. I was so convinced that I understood business and career development better than you did. I never considered that your choices might be part of a larger strategy that I couldn't see. You were trying to be helpful based on your own experience and understanding, I replied. The problem was assuming that your approach to career development was the only valid path to professional success, and now you're more successful than I am, Derek continued, his voice carrying a mixture of amazement and what might have been pride. You built something from nothing while I've been coasting in a job that pays well but doesn't really challenge me or create anything meaningful. The comparison seemed to be causing Derek genuine reflection about his own career satisfaction and professional goals. While he'd been focusing on my supposed failures,
he'd avoided examining his own sense of fulfillment and purpose in his pharmaceutical sales position. Learning about ConnectPoint's success was forcing him to consider whether his own definition of career achievement was actually satisfying. Success means different things to different people, I said, echoing my earlier conversation with Stephanie. Your job provides financial security and allows you to support your family. Those are meaningful achievements that deserve respect. But they're not the same as building something innovative that creates value for other people, Derek replied. What you've done with ConnectPoint, identifying a market need and developing a solution that helps small businesses succeed, that's actually making a difference in people's lives. The conversation was taking an unexpected turn toward Derek's own professional dissatisfaction, which suggested that his attacks on my career choices might have been motivated partly by his own frustration with feeling stuck in a position that provided security but not fulfillment. The successful older brother who had been offering career advice to his struggling sister was beginning to question whether his own career choices reflected genuine success or simply the appearance of stability. Have you been unhappy at the pharmaceutical company? I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective on his own professional situation. Not unhappy exactly, but not excited either, Derek admitted. I've been doing essentially the same job for 5 years with minor variations in territory and product line. The money is good, and the benefits are solid, but I can't say I'm passionate about selling medications to doctors who already know more about them than I do. Have you considered making a change? Exploring opportunities that might be more intellectually stimulating or personally meaningful? I've thought about it, but Stephanie and I have a mortgage and responsibilities. We can't afford to take the kind of risks that you took when you started ConnectPoint. We need the steady income and health insurance that come with traditional employment. Derek's explanation revealed something important about the difference in our situations and risk tolerance. He was viewing career changes through the lens of someone with significant financial obligations and responsibilities to another person, while I had been free to pursue entrepreneurship as a single person with minimal fixed expenses and no dependents. That's a fair point, I acknowledge. Having a spouse and financial obligations does change the risk calculation for career transitions, but there might be ways to explore new opportunities without completely abandoning the security you need, like
I can't exactly start a consulting business on the side while working full-time in pharmaceutical sales. The conflict of interest issues alone would be problematic, like identifying transferable skills from your current role that could be valuable in other industries, or exploring internal opportunities for more challenging assignments, or developing expertise in areas that interest you personally, even if they don't directly relate to your current job. Derek was quiet for a moment, apparently considering the possibilities I'd suggested. I've actually been interested in medical device sales for a while. The technology is more innovative, and the sales process is more consultative than what I'm doing now. But I assumed it would be too difficult to make the transition without starting over at entry level. That assumption might be worth testing, I suggested. Your experience with medical professionals and understanding of healthcare systems could be valuable assets for medical device companies, even if the specific products are different. The conversation was evolving into something I hadn't expected, a genuine discussion about Derek's career development, rather than a confrontation about my business secrecy. The revelation about ConnectPoint's success seemed to have shifted his perspective, from defensive justification to thoughtful self-examination, which suggested that our relationship might be entering a new phase based on mutual respect, rather than assumed hierarchy. Can I ask you another question? Derek said. If I had been more supportive of your entrepreneurial ambitions from the beginning, would you have shared more details about ConnectPoint's development? Or was the secrecy always part of your strategy? The question touched on the counterfactual scenario that I'd sometimes wondered about myself. Would I have been more open about my business planning if Derek had demonstrated genuine interest in my goals rather than focusing on what he perceived as my career instability? The answer required acknowledging that family relationships inevitably influenced professional decisions, even when we tried to keep those domains separate. I think I would have been more willing to discuss the concept and get feedback on the business model, I said honestly. Having a supportive family member to bounce ideas off could have been valuable during the development phase, but I probably still would have kept the financial details private until the business was established. Because you didn't trust me to keep that information confidential. Because I wanted to control the timing and context of revealing Connect Point's success. Family dynamics can complicate business relationships in ways that aren't always helpful. Derek seemed to understand the distinction I was making. Like how Stephanie working with your company creates potential conflicts between our personal relationship and her professional needs. Exactly. Business decisions should be based on merit and value creation, not family connections or personal dynamics. But it's hard to maintain that separation when the same people are involved in both contexts. How is that working out, by the way? Stephanie seems really excited about the consulting project, but I'm wondering if it's awkward for you to have your sister-in-law as a client. It's been entirely professional so far, I replied. Stephanie is an excellent client who asks thoughtful questions and provides valuable insights about her company's challenges. The fact that we're related hasn't interfered with the quality of our collaboration. I was worried that our family drama might complicate her ability to get the help Meridian needs. The concern in Derek's voice suggested that he was beginning to understand the difference between personal relationships and professional obligation. The brother who had spent Thanksgiving dinner publicly mocking my career was demonstrating genuine care about whether family conflicts might interfere with his wife's business needs. Speaking of family drama, Derek continued with obvious reluctance, I owe you an apology for my behavior at Thanksgiving. Even if I had been right about your career situation, which I clearly wasn't, there was no excuse for humiliating you in front of the entire family. That was cruel and inappropriate. The apology was more sincere than I'd expected, carrying genuine remorse rather than the perfunctory acknowledgement of wrongdoing that sometimes passed for accountability in family conflict. Derek seemed to understand that his Thanksgiving behavior had been fundamentally wrong regardless of whether his assumptions about my career had been accurate. I appreciate the apology. Public humiliation is never an appropriate way to express concern about someone's welfare, even if that concern is genuine. It wasn't really about concern for your welfare, Derek admitted with painful honesty. It was about making myself feel superior by highlighting what I thought were your failures. I was showing off for the family at your expense, and that's inexcusable. The confession revealed a level of self-awareness that surprised me and suggested that Derek was capable of examining his own motivations with uncomfortable clarity. The successful older brother who had positioned himself as the family's voice of practical wisdom was acknowledging that his behavior had been driven by ego and insecurity rather than genuine care for my well-being. What prompted that level of cruelty? I asked, genuinely curious about the psychological dynamics that had led to his Thanksgiving attack. I mean, you've been condescending about my career choices before, but Thursday night felt particularly vicious. Derek was quiet for a long moment, apparently wrestling with whether to share the deeper motivations behind his behavior. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone confronting truths about himself that he'd been avoiding. I've been feeling stuck professionally for the past year, he said slowly, passed over for promotions, watching younger colleagues advance past me, questioning whether I'm actually as successful as I've been telling myself. When I saw you at Thanksgiving, apparently struggling with unemployment and financial insecurity, it made me feel better about my own situation by comparison. So attacking my career choices was a way of reinforcing your belief that your path had been superior. Exactly. If you were failing at entrepreneurship and non-traditional career moves, then my choice to prioritize stability and conventional success was validated. Your struggles proved that I had been right to play it safe. The psychological mechanism Derek was describing made perfect sense, though it also revealed how his need for validation had overwhelmed his capacity for empathy or family loyalty. The older brother who should have been supporting my professional development had instead been using my apparent failures to bolster his own fragile sense of achievement. And now that you know I wasn't actually struggling, now I have to confront the possibility that I chose security over ambition because I was afraid of taking risks, not because I was making superior strategic decisions. Your success with Connect Point suggests that I might have been capable of more than I've achieved if I'd been willing to bet on myself the way you did. Derek's honesty was both impressive and heartbreaking. The revelation about my business success wasn't just changing his perception of my capabilities, it was forcing him to reevaluate his own choices and consider whether his definition of success had been limited by fear rather than practical wisdom. There's nothing wrong with choosing security, I said gently, Different people have different risk tolerances and life circumstances that influence their career decisions. Your path worked for your situation and priority, but did it really work, or did I just convince myself it was working because I was afraid to try anything more ambitious? The question hung between us like a challenge to everything Derek had believed about professional success and personal fulfillment. The brother who had spent years offering career advice was confronting the possibility that his own choices had been motivated by limitations rather than wisdom. "Only you can answer that question," I replied. "But the fact that you're asking it suggests that you're ready to consider whether your current situation reflects your actual goals or just your comfort zone." Derek and I talked for another 30 minutes, exploring the implications of Connect Point's success for our relationship and our respective career paths. The conversation was more honest and substantive than any discussion we'd had in years, marked by mutual respect and genuine curiosity, rather than the defensive posturing that had characterized our previous interactions. By the time we ended the call, something fundamental had shifted between us. The dynamic of successful older brother offering guidance to struggling younger sister had been permanently altered, replaced by a more equal relationship between two adults who were both navigating complex professional challenges and opportunity. "One more thing," Derek said, as we prepared to hang up. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished with Connect Point. I know I haven't been supportive of your entrepreneurial ambitions in the past, but I want you to know that I admire what you've built and the courage it took to pursue your vision despite skepticism from family members like me." The pride in his voice was unmistakable and deeply meaningful. After years of criticism and condescension, hearing Derek acknowledge my professional achievements with genuine admiration felt like a form of validation I hadn't realized I needed. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means more to me than you probably realize." The following week brought Connect Point's public launch, marked by a coordinated media campaign that included interviews with business publications, speaking engagements at entrepreneurship events, and a comprehensive digital marketing strategy designed to build brand awareness among small business owners and professional service providers. The response exceeded our most optimistic projections. Within 72 hours of the official announcement, Connect Point had received over 300 new client applications and more than 800 requests from professionals wanting to join our expert network. The business press coverage was overwhelmingly positive, with several articles highlighting our innovative approach to making high-level consulting expertise accessible to companies that couldn't afford traditional consulting fees. Most satisfying of all was a feature story in Atlanta Business Chronicle that positioned Connect Point as one of the most promising local startups and included an interview with me about the market opportunity and our growth strategy. The article included a professional headshot and detailed description of my background and qualifications, making it impossible for anyone in Atlanta's business community to miss the fact that Mia Chen had built something significant. Derek called within hours of the article's publication, his voice carrying excitement and what sounded like genuine pride. "I just read the Business Chronicle piece about Connect Point. The reporter described you as one of Atlanta's most promising young entrepreneurs. That's incredible." "The media attention has been gratifying," I agreed. "It's validation that the market recognizes the value of what we've built." "Have Mom and Dad seen the article yet? They're going to be so proud when they realize what you've accomplished." The mention of our parents reminded me that Derek and I weren't the only family members who would need to adjust their understanding of my professional situation. Our mother and father had been worried about my career stability for months, accepting Derek's assessment that my job changes indicated problems with my work ethic or professional judgment. I called them this morning to share the news before they heard about it from other sources. They were surprised but incredibly supportive once they understood the scope of what Connect Point has become. "Surprised is probably an understatement," Derek said with a laugh. "I imagine they're feeling the same way I did when Stephanie first told me about your business success. Like they'd been worried about the wrong things for months." They expressed some regret about not being more encouraging of my entrepreneurial ambitions, I admitted. But I explained that the secrecy was strategic rather than a reflection of our family relationship. Derek and I continued talking about the media response and the business opportunities that were emerging from ConnectPoint's increased visibility. The conversation was relaxed and collaborative, marked by Derek's genuine interest in my success rather than the competitive undertones that had characterized our previous discussions about career development. "Can I ask you for some advice?" Derek said eventually, his voice carrying a hesitancy that suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with the role reversal this request represented. "Of course, I've been thinking about what you said regarding medical device sales and exploring opportunities that might be more fulfilling than my current position. Do you have any suggestions about how to research companies and positions without alerting my current employer to the fact that I'm considering a change?" The request represented a complete transformation in our dynamic. The older brother, who had spent years offering unsolicited career advice, was asking for guidance from the sister he'd previously viewed as professionally unsuccessful. But more than role reversal, Derek's question suggested that he was taking seriously the possibility of pursuing more challenging and meaningful work. "Networking is probably your best starting point," I suggest. "Identify professionals who work in medical device sales and ask for informational interviews to learn about the industry and potential opportunities. LinkedIn is particularly useful for finding and connecting with people who might be willing to share insights about their companies and roles. Would it be appropriate to mention that I'm currently employed but exploring options, or should I be more discreet about my situation?" Most professionals understand that successful people periodically evaluate their career options. So being honest about your situation shouldn't be problematic as long as you're respectful about confidentiality and timing. Derek and I spent another 20 minutes discussing research strategies, networking approaches, and techniques for evaluating potential employers and opportunities. The conversation felt natural and productive, characterized by mutual respect and genuine collaboration rather than the tension that had marked our previous interactions. "Thank you for the advice," Derek said as we prepared to end the call. "It feels strange asking you for career guidance, after years of assuming I was the one with superior professional insight, but I appreciate your willingness to help despite my previous behavior. Family members should support each other's professional development," I replied. "I'm glad you feel comfortable asking for input, and I hope you find opportunities that are more fulfilling than your current position." 3 weeks later, Derek called with news that demonstrated he'd been taking our conversation seriously. Through networking and research, he'd identified several medical device companies that were actively recruiting experienced sales professionals with healthcare industry background. More importantly, he'd scheduled interviews with 2 organizations that offered the kind of innovative technology and consultative sales approach he'd been seeking. "I wanted to thank you again for encouraging me to explore these opportunities," he said during our conversation. "I'd been telling myself that career changes were too risky given our financial obligations, but your success with ConnectPoint helped me realize that calculated risks can lead to much better outcomes than playing it safe indefinitely." The gratitude in Derek's voice was genuine and deeply satisfying. After years of criticism and condescension, hearing my brother acknowledge that my professional choices had inspired his own career development felt like validation of everything I'd worked to achieve. "How did the interviews go?" I asked, genuinely curious about his experience exploring new professional opportunities. "Better than I expected," Derek replied with obvious excitement. "Both companies were impressed by my healthcare industry experience and client relationship skill. The technology they're developing is fascinating, much more innovative than the pharmaceutical products I've been selling, and the compensation packages are competitive with what I'm earning now, with significantly more upside potential based on performance." "That sounds promising. Are you planning to pursue either opportunity?" "I'm waiting to hear back from my top choice, but if they make an offer, I think I'm ready to make the transition. Stephanie has been incredibly supportive, and we've determined that the financial risk is manageable given the potential for increased earnings and job satisfaction." Derek's willingness to embrace professional uncertainty represented a fundamental shift in his approach to career development. The brother who had criticized my entrepreneurial ambitions for their inherent risks was now pursuing opportunities that required him to leave comfortable security for the possibility of greater achievement and fulfillment. "I'm proud of you for being willing to take this step," I said sincerely. "It takes courage to leave a stable situation for something that might be better but isn't guaranteed. I learned from watching you build ConnectPoint
that the biggest risks might be staying in a situation that doesn't challenge you or utilize your full potential, Derek replied. Your success showed me that intelligent risk-taking can lead to outcomes that aren't possible through conventional career paths. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, with Derek sharing details about the companies he was considering and the factors he was weighing in his decision-making process. Throughout the discussion, he demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking and careful analysis that I'd always known he possessed, but that hadn't been fully utilized in his pharmaceutical sales role. Whatever you decide, I'm confident you'll be successful, I said as we prepared to end the call. You have the professional skills and relationship abilities that these companies are looking for. Thank you for believing in me, Derek replied. It means a lot to have your support, especially given how dismissive I've been of your choices in the past. 6 months after ConnectPoint's public launch, our family gathered for Easter dinner at our parents' house. The atmosphere was markedly different from our previous holiday celebrations, characterized by genuine pride in each other's achievements, rather than competitive comparison or subtle criticism. Derek had accepted the position with the medical device company and was thriving in his new role, consistently exceeding sales targets, while enjoying work that challenged him intellectually and utilized his consultative strength. Stephanie's company had successfully implemented all 3 phases of ConnectPoint's operational recommendations, resulting in improved efficiency, reduced employee turnover, and significant revenue growth that positioned them for continued expansion. ConnectPoint had grown beyond my initial projections, serving over 200 active clients, and maintaining a network of more than 300 verified professionals across multiple specialty areas. The platform had attracted attention from larger consulting firms interested in licensing our technology and methodology, creating opportunities for partnerships that would accelerate our market penetration without requiring additional capital investment. Most importantly, the relationship between Derek and me had evolved into something neither of us had expected, a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to professional excellence. The competitive dynamic that had characterized our interactions for years had been replaced by collaborative support for each other's career development and personal growth. I have an announcement to make, Derek said during dessert, his voice carrying excitement and what might have been nervous energy. Stephanie and I have decided to start our own marketing consultancy, specializing in healthcare industry clients. We're planning to launch next year after we've both gained some additional experience in our current roles. The announcement surprised everyone at the table, though perhaps it shouldn't have, given Derek's professional transformation and Stephanie's success with operational improvements at Meridian. Both of them had developed expertise and confidence that positioned them well for entrepreneurial ventures, and their combined skills in sales and marketing operations would be valuable assets for healthcare companies needing strategic support. That's wonderful, our mother said, beaming with pride at her son's entrepreneurial ambitions. It sounds like you're following in Mia's footsteps by building something that creates value for your client. Actually, we're hoping Mia might be willing to provide some guidance about business planning and platform development, Derek said, looking at me with the kind of respect that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. ConnectPoint's success has shown us what's possible when you identify an underserved market and develop innovative solutions to address client needs. The request for mentorship represented the complete transformation of our relationship. The older brother who had once offered me entry-level employment at his company was now seeking my expertise about entrepreneurship and business development. But more than role reversal, Derek's request reflected genuine appreciation for what I'd accomplished and confidence in my ability to help him achieve similar success. I'd be honored to help however I can, I replied sincerely. Building a successful consulting business requires careful planning and strategic thinking, but you both have the professional skills and industry knowledge that clients value. As our family dinner continued, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. The woman who had sat silently at Thanksgiving dinner while her brother mocked her career choices had become someone whose professional achievements commanded respect and whose expertise was actively sought by family members and clients alike. But perhaps more importantly, the family dynamic that had been characterized by competition and comparison had evolved into something healthier and more supportive. Derek's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and pursue more fulfilling work had created space for authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than assumed hierarchy. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it had required both of us to examine our assumptions about success, failure, and family loyalty. But the result was a relationship that enriched both our personal and professional lives in ways that wouldn't have been possible under our previous dynamic. As I drove home that evening, passing through the downtown neighborhood that Derek had once criticized as evidence of my poor decision-making, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong and everything to do with building something meaningful that served others, while creating opportunities for continued growth and development. Connect Point had become more successful than I'd initially imagined possible, but perhaps more importantly, it had catalyzed changes in my family relationships that transformed how we understood and supported each other's professional journey. The platform that connected small businesses with strategic expertise had also connected me with a version of myself that was confident, capable, and worthy of respect regardless of external validation. The real victory wasn't Derek's acknowledgement of my success or his apology for previous behavior. The real victory was building a life and career that reflected my own values and ambitions, rather than other people's limited understanding of what was possible. Everything else was just the inevitable result of staying true to that vision despite temporary setbacks and family complications. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.